Greetings to you. I am Attorney Qiana Manns with Manns Law Office, PLLC, with the Atonement Dispute Resolution Center in Sunnyside, Texas. And we are back again with our webinar series, and you are going to enjoy this one. You all know we started our webinar series at our 16th year business anniversary because you know when you're 16, you just show out. And you come and you do all the things that you've always wanted to do. And so this is something that I wanted to do and wanted to bring to the community. And with that, I dragged along my co-host, Athill Muhammad. I would say kicking and screaming, but that's not actually true. He really came aboard and was more than willing to help me and to be a part of this webinar series. So I am forever grateful and thankful to him for coming and joining me on this ride, on this journey today. You are going to be in for a treat. Today's webinar is Living Under the Shadow of Death, Police Misconduct in the Justice System. And so you have a treat in store for you. I know most of us have been glued to the TV and watching the trials and just seeing all of the things that we have unfortunately had to see and witness with the killings and the abuse of the police happening in society. Really, it seems like on a daily basis. And so we wanted to have you to have legal representatives in front of you, attorneys who practice, who are on the front line, who are able to give you not just information like talking heads. We have a lot of commentary by people who don't actually work in the field. And why I'm so excited about this webinar series, we've been able to bring you some of the best and the brightest who actually do the day-to-day work in the area of law that we bring to you. And they practice in these areas and they are able to give you real information based on not only their knowledge and experience and expertise from research and learning this material, but from their day-to-day practice in living and working in this area. And so without further ado, I am going to introduce to you all my co-host, who this is one of his babies. He practices in criminal law. And so because we come before you every month, I'm going to kind of give you just a brief introduction to him because you know him. You've been following us. So Athill Muhammad was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, and earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in political science in 1985 from Lincoln University. He subsequently studied at the University of the District of Columbia in Washington, D.C. in the discipline of urban policy. Driven by his West Indian heritage, and that's something I can't take out because y'all know he slip on and slip off the accent from time to time. Mr. Muhammad eventually left DC and he moved to Houston, Texas. And he's a proud graduate of Texas Southern University. That's something that, you know, people start chopping off heads if you leave that out. Of Thurgood Marshall School of Law. He graduated with honors and he was listed on the Who's Who Among Law Students 2001 publication. Since he's been licensed, Mr. Muhammad has dedicated his practice to the endeavors of federal employment discrimination, civil rights matters, and representing persons accused of crimes in both federal and state courts, as well as representing clients in proceedings and hearings with the various federal and state administrative agencies and entities. He is a dedicated legal researcher and writer on federal, state, and civil and criminal right and appeals matters, including concerns the United States Supreme Court, the Texas Supreme Court, and the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. He also serves as an attorney staff assistant to the General Counsel of the Nation of Islam. He's a member of the NAACP, Houston Community Legal Redress Committee, and holds memberships with the American Bar, the Houston Lawyers Association, and the Omega Phi Psi Fraternity, among others. That's another thing I can't leave out. I had to, you know, almost pull teeth to have him wear this red tie. So today, introducing you again to my co-host who's going to help me today bring out this information and present these wonderful attorneys to you all, Athill Muhammad.
And thank you, my dear Sister Qiana. And it's always, you know, every time I hear, you know, the bio read, I wonder who wrote that. But we pray to Allah that we can live up to, you know, what has been written, and we continue, you know, in those endeavors. And you know, I was just so pleased that, you know, with all of the seminars that and webinars that we've had, this one is certainly, as you alluded to, is dear to my heart, because this is indeed one of the areas that that I practice in. And so, as you said in the beginning with our listening audience, we are indeed in store for a treat. So I would just say, everybody buckle up and let's get ready to ride.
And we're going to introduce, of course, the ladies, because it's always ladies first. And we have some powerhouse attorneys for you today. Pamela Muhammad. Pamela Muhammad is a civil and human rights attorney and advocate in Houston, Texas. She was born and raised in St. Louis, Ferguson, Missouri. She is a member of the Nation of Islam. Sister Pamela is a wife and mother of 2 daughters. She received her Juris Doctorate in 1989 from Southern University Law Center, and also graduated with a Bachelor's of Science degree in Computer Information Systems from the University of Central Missouri. She is a member of the State Bar of Texas since 1990, and for over 30 years has practiced law. She is licensed in the state of Missouri also. She is committed to the work of community development, empowerment through providing the knowledge and benefits of law and quality legal advice to Black and underserved families and communities. She has been in private practice for over 30 years and has worked with nonprofit and community organizations. Among her areas of practice are family law, business law, juvenile law, criminal law, child welfare, employment discrimination, personal injury, appellate litigation, human rights litigation. What does she not do? She does it all. Attorney Pamela Muhammad has been fighting in the courts and the community since the early 1990s against unjust practices such as sweeping imprisonment and criminalization of Black youth in the school to prison pipeline. I know this is a passion of hers, so want to get that right. The racial profiling and police brutality in Black and brown communities, and those policing in the child welfare system and those policies in the child welfare system that disproportionately impact Black families with the removal of children and separations of families. She currently works with the Coalition for the Preservation of Black Family, an organization founded by her and others to advocate for Black families in crisis. And she is my mentor and was one of the attorneys who allowed me to sit at her feet and to learn from her. And so I thank you so much for agreeing to join us today. I have learned so much from her, and she has taught not only myself, but other young attorneys, you know, who are looking to come up in this practice of not to take nothing from nobody, because she does not. When I'm telling you, will go up to the federal court, and you have to just see her in action. And so I appreciate you, Sister Pamela, for all of the work that you have done, and for, of course, helping me to be where I am. None of us, you know, can get to where we are without the assistance, you know, of those who have come before us. And so you are going to hear, she has a wealth of information on constitutional law and everything. So you're in for a treat today.
Yes.
Our next presenter or panelist is Mellissa Norris. Mellissa Norris has practiced criminal defense and family law for nearly 15 years. Mellissa is a proud alumni of Prairie View A&M University and Thurgood Marshall School of Law. So she real black. Okay? Black. She was licensed in Texas, Arkansas, and United States of America, Southern District, Texas, Federal Court. Mellissa believes that every person has constitutional right to zealous legal representation, and she has provided that to over 200 clients. She is a managing partner of Norris Law Firm in Houston, and her clients count on her for her knowledgeable, sympathetic, and passionate representation. As a criminal attorney, she holds the state's attorney to their burden to provide proof beyond a reasonable doubt and fights diligently against injustice. She understands the wheels of justice are slow moving and sometimes anything but just. And she strives to ensure that she serves the underserved and the unprotected and the underestimated. Mellissa is a firm believer that only way that we can change the system is to have an infusion of well-prepared, bright young minds as judges, legislators, attorneys, peace officers, probation and parole officers, and corrections officers and administrators. As a mother of a beautiful little girl who seems to be following in her footsteps, she understands that the fate of our future rests solely on the shoulders of the children and young adults that come behind us. She has chosen to use her gifts to be a social engineer, protecting and representing her clients from all walks of life, but has a special affection for the left behind, lost, or less privileged. And I've seen her in action too. And you don't want to be on the other side. Let me tell you, because when she says she fights for those who are underserved and underestimated, when they get her on their team, it's a whole nother story. So I thank you so much for being a part of this panel too, because I don't know, it's nothing like a female Black attorney. I'm just gonna tell you the truth. I love my brothers, but when we're talking about criminal law and the criminal justice system, when we come to fight, we got everything. Like they say, when a woman ready to fight, you better watch the water boiling on the stove and everything else. So I thank you, my sisters, for joining us on today. And Brother Athill will introduce our other panelists.
Yes, ma'am, and thank you once again, Sister Qiana, for those wonderful introductions of Sister Pamela and Sister Mellissa, and the honor of introducing our two other esteemed panelists. One is Brother Abdul Arif Muhammad, who was born in the mid-1950s in Baltimore, Maryland, where he attended public schools. At age 11, he won first prize in a Baltimore citywide oration contest in the junior years category, delivering a speech on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. After Dr. King's assassination in 1968, Brother Arif was invited to tour the state of Maryland, delivering his award-winning speech on Dr. King's life. Brother Arif attended and graduated from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County in the late 1970s. In his senior year at UMBC in 1979, he met the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan at Coppin State College in Baltimore through one of his academic mentors. After hearing a profound spiritual message from the minister, Brother Arif accepted to become his helper and follower that same day. And for the last 40 years, he has been a helper to him, serving in many capacities, including being the first believer and study group coordinator, also known as a student minister, in Baltimore, Maryland in 1979. Although a student in the ministry, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan granted his request to finish law school studies, and in 1984, Brother Arif graduated from the Howard University Law School in Washington, D.C., while elected president of the student bar. After law school, Brother Arif resumed his service in the ministry, serving in student ministry positions in both Richmond and Norfolk, Virginia. In 1990, Brother Arif accepted a bid to run for the House of Representatives for the D.C. delegate seat in the District of Columbia. In 1991, Brother Arif became the Nation of Islam's General Counsel, a position that he continues to serve to this very day. In 1993, Brother Arif was appointed by the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan as the Mid-Atlantic Regional Minister, headquartered at Muhammad Mosque No. 4 in Washington, D.C., and served in that capacity until 1997, and was the regional director of the historic Million Man March and served as a member of its national board. In 1999, Brother Arif was relocated to Chicago, Illinois to serve at the Nation of Islam's national headquarters. Since that relocation, Brother Arif has served as a member of the National Board of Laborers until 2009, and as the editor-in-chief and general manager of the Final Call newspaper from 2006 to 2009. In 2012, Brother Arif was appointed by the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan to serve as a member of the Executive Council of the Nation of Islam, while also serving as a member of the Nation of Islam's research team at the minister's request and pleasure. Brother Arif continues to be a dedicated and passionate helper, follower, and student in the ministry of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, who continues to give us revelation and a deeper understanding of the teachings of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Brothers and sisters, another one of my dearest friends, mentors, and confidants, I introduce and give to you Brother Abdul Arif Muhammad.
Alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam, sir. And we also, the next panelist that I have the distinct pleasure of introducing is Brother Warren Fitzgerald Muhammad. Warren Fitzgerald Muhammad is a 1979 honors graduate of the Texas Southern University's Thurgood Marshall School of Law here in Houston, Texas, and has excelled in the practice area of personal injury, criminal defense, and business and transactional law since licensing in 1979. He has extensive experience in personal injury, wrongful death, and medical malpractice civil litigation in both federal and state courts involving jury trials, writs, temporary restraining orders, and appeals. Over the years, Attorney Muhammad has secured substantial settlements in excess of $5 million on behalf of injured victims against corporate defendants for injuries such as catastrophic burns, medical malpractice, slip and fall, and products liability, and he has secured civil settlements on behalf of recording artists against such entertainment giants as Sony Columbia Records and Def Jam Universal. Attorney Muhammad has practiced business law and transactional law throughout his career, advising entrepreneurs on the proper business structures and agreements to meet needs. He is versed in all types of business entities, including but not limited to corporations, limited liability companies, series LLCs, partnerships, and limited partnerships. Attorney Muhammad has represented clients before the Securities and Exchange Commission and engaged with federal authorities and agencies from the Secret Service to the Justice Department with regard to cryptocurrency issues. He has participated in business delegations to London, England, and Lima, Peru on behalf of clients in international financial transactions. A seasoned criminal defense lawyer, over his more than 40, year career, Attorney Muhammad has successfully represented citizens accused of complicated felony cases and secured not guilty verdicts in matters such as attempted capital murder on a police officer, murder, and aggravated assaults. As part of his community service, Attorney Muhammad has hosted and lectured free legal workshops throughout the city of Houston. These workshops include Know Your Rights workshops, a presentation teaching citizens on rights when stopped by law enforcement and how to negotiate and survive the encounter. Clearing Your Criminal Record workshops, a workshop where citizens are interviewed to determine if records can be cleared or sealed so that they may be able to obtain employment and become productive citizens after having paid their debts to society, and wills and probate workshops explaining the process of will writing and the probate and estate planning processes. In 2012, Mr. Muhammad was appointed by the mayor of the city of Houston to serve as an associate judge on the municipal bench and was reappointed in 2014 for a second term. During his tenure, he presided over and handled arraignment and various juvenile, jail, and trial dockets, and performed various magistrate issues concerning the issuance of search warrants, orders of emergency protection, and 24-hour arraignments after arrests, as well as performing numerous marriage ceremonies. Since leaving the bench, Attorney Muhammad has returned to private practice with the law office of Warren Fitzgerald Muhammad, PLLC, and continues licensing through the State Bar of Texas and the United States District Court for the Southern District of Texas. And he is currently the chairman of the board of directors and CEO of the Acres Homes Chamber of Business and Economic Development, a community-based nonprofit in the historic Acres Home community, the place of his birth in Houston, Texas. Brothers and sisters, another one of my dearest friends, mentors, and confidants, Attorney Warren Fitzgerald Muhammad.
Good evening and peace to everyone. Thank you, Brother Athill.
And he is also another one who allowed me to sit at his foot and to learn and to grow. And nurtured me to be the attorney that I am today. So it is just a wonderful opportunity, and we can't cut his bio short. We've tried, but he's done all of those things. He really has. He really has. And also, I think it's important, you know, for us in our community to have an understanding of the quality of professionals that we have among us. And so I always want to present the best and the brightest and let you know that we have them here in our community. Because in our practice, we do always have to try to some way prove ourselves, or you know, get clients to understand that the ice is not always colder, as I know my co-host says often, and that you don't see more hard-working, dedicated professionals than you do with Black attorneys. And I've had the privilege and the honor of working with so many who are just jewels in our community. And I wanted you all to have an opportunity to hear from them, to learn from them, and to know that we're here and we have everything that we need. And so part of the purpose of this series was to allow you all to know us and for us to be able to help you and to make sure that you are aware that we have the expertise, we have the knowledge. And in this time, it's very important that you are giving information that you can use, and that information that is quality information from the people who do the work day in and day out. And like I said, these are not talking heads. We have those who are really on the ground doing the work. And so the purpose of this webinar series, Living Under the Shadow of Death, Police Misconduct in the Justice System, is to talk about the Chauvin trial and to these other trials that are coming up, because we know we're going to continue to see and experience all of this. And just talk about other abuse cases and get some, you know, legal commentary and perspectives from those who work in the courtroom, who actually defend individuals who have been victimized by police abuse and misconduct, and also to discuss legal recourse and redress that's available to you all and to the public, you know, who, if you are experiencing this type of treatment, or have, you know, someone in your family who has experienced this type of treatment. And so I want to go ahead and just get right into it, because it's been, you know, on every news station, and I think everybody has talked about it, and wanted to just get some real people who do the work every day, and their perspective on, you know, the Chauvin trial, and, you know, some observations of what did you see, and, you know, how do you think, you know, the trial went, and your analysis concerning, you know, how the case was presented by the prosecutors, so that we, you know, finally got some type of convictions for our brother, for our community, for those who fight in this work. How did you see it? What is your perspective on it?
Is this anybody's game? Okay. Well, I was exceptionally impressed with the prosecution's ability to lay out all of the elements of the charges. I usually don't root for the state, so I found myself in a very unfamiliar position. But I am concerned. So I'm cautiously excited about the verdict, but I'm concerned about the sentencing because there have been convictions in the past, or at least one that we were really excited about in Dallas, where it was clear that a murder or a wrongful killing had taken place. And while we celebrated the conviction, the whole stereotypical, docile, Black people like to forgive thing tainted, in my opinion, tainted the jury into offering grace to the officer when, of course, his name just escaped me, I'm sorry. But the victim got none. But here we are, we watched George Floyd be murdered for 9 minutes and 28 seconds. And of course, we celebrated the verdict because we knew it was the right verdict. But now they're going to do a sentencing 8 weeks from now. And the eyes of the world may not be watching that. And now you've taken the punishment phase, which to me is the most important, and put it into the hands of the judge who may be a little bit less sensitive than the people who were horrified by watching what we watched. So I'm very concerned about it, but I was impressed with the trial itself.
And what's interesting is because as Sister Mellissa was saying, the sentencing is in the hands of the judge. He ordered, of course, a pre-sentence investigation report. And although, Minnesota follows a sentencing guideline, if it's similar to the federal system, and if it is similar, the whole procedure is similar to the federal, the public will never even see the PSI, the pre-sentence investigation report. So in truth, we won't really know, the public won't really know what all had gone into the pre-sentence investigation report that would enable a judge to pass sentence. And so, as I've been telling people, just as Sister Mellissa was saying, yes, we may be pleased and impressed, I guess, with a guilty verdict, but the sentencing hasn't taken place yet. As I was telling, a number of people, we might be on the road to justice on behalf, or the road may be, paved right now on justice on behalf of George Floyd, but it's not over yet because sentencing has yet to take place.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Well, assalamu alaikum, and thank you, Sister Qiana and Brother Athill for allowing me to come on you all's platform, and all praises due to Allah for all the nice things that you said, sis. I wanted to say though, that trial actually made me physically ill, and I watched it. I was actually just kind of mesmerized on the scene because we're working in these environments where we're working at home and the TV is in the backdrop. But I think that the reality of the outrageous, just the animalistic and savagery
We seem to be having some connection issues. Hopefully we can get
Can you
her
hear
back
me?
on. I can hear you. Yes.
This is Brother Arif.
Yes.
Well, I want to thank you, Sister Qiana and Brother Athill. One person whose bio we didn't read is Sister Qiana's. Somebody should let us be aware, and the community has a right to know about this little superwoman over here who does so many things in the community. We may be someone that has helped her over the years, but she sure has been an excellent example to us as one who loves her community and loves her family and loves her nation. And she is always found trying to do something to help her people. So I call her a little superwoman. So next time, make sure we read her bio, Brother Athill. As she read yours, read hers, because she's a dynamo. Now, going to this point about living under the shadow of death. some of you may be aware of this great book called The Fall of America. And in The Fall of America, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad has an article, and it's on page, I think, 28. I just want to flip to it, and it's called Under the Shadow of Death. And he says to us in this book, we live under the shadow of death. We fled from the cowardly enemy, devils of the South, seeking refuge in the same cowardly enemy's brother in the North. The enemy devils of the South followed us to the North to see that his brother of the North does not treat us any better than they did in the South. They seek police jobs so that they can beat and kill us who are trying to escape. They do not care about our loyalty to them. In their hearts, there's death for you or death for us, the Black man in America, and by extension, the Black woman. That's the framework. So under this kind of context, when we look at the ultimate solution of this, it really is separation. We'll never get justice from this enemy. As the Honorable Elijah Muhammad has taught us, the white man is completely disagreeable to get along with in peace, and he's never going to give justice unless there's a power that makes him bow down, which in his nature, he's not born to do, or made to do, I should say more accurately. But what we do in the meantime while we're here, we do have to keep advancing the fight and keep pressing the fight. And I think the enemy was very wise to realize that there was a powder keg of an explosion if they didn't do what appeared to be the right thing with Mr. George Floyd, because that brought back modern lynching. It brought back the bestiality of the enemy, his savagery, to be witnessed and to see the horror of a man calling for his mother and literally dying under the knee of someone, and then 3 others aiding this. This kind of thing could spark absolute revolution because of the savagery of the killing. It reminded me of Walter Scott, I believe, in Carolina, where he was running away and the man just unloaded into his back. See, these kinds of savage acts, as horrible as they are, God permits it because God wants us to get to the point where we have to ask the question, how much more can we stand? Some of us may have forgotten 2015 when the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan went around the country and we met on the mall again on the 20th anniversary of the Million Man March, justice or else. See, that is the cry today. You're going to have to give us justice or else. Well, what is the or else? We believe that we are the people of God. We believe God came for us. We believe God has the power to liberate us from our enemies, but we have to be willing to stand as well, that he may have us to be a part of that agency. So they were wise. They knew they had to convict him. And yes, I would say as a lawyer watching the case, I was very impressed with the prosecution presentation, though I'm not in favor of no prosecutors, but in this case, they did the right job. And the poor defense man looked so terrible in his effort to try and put some kind of face on this, because there was no face to put on this. It was out and out brazen savagery. Now the judge is under pressure because I just read something where everyone is complaining about how this judge is going to rule. And the judge said that he believed that the circumstances of George Floyd present aggravating circumstances, which may allow him, of course, to give him more time than what the sentencing guidelines would say. Well, that's because of the pressure of the people. And so there's concern, but we will watch. George Floyd became the symbol, but so many before him, we don't have time to call all the names. But in a small way, this was a small victory, but let's look at the role of all of those that were killed right after George Floyd. Let us not forget, we're living under the shadow of death. The only true solution is separation from this enemy. But in the meantime, we must keep the fight on and we must keep the pressure on. Thank you.
Attorney Pamela is back with us. We lost you for a minute. Did you want to continue on with your comment?
Well, I think listening to Brother Arif, he concluded that pretty well. And again, I think because looking at the children and looking at what we need to do, I think the trial gave us some very good blueprint as to the impact of what is going on with our children in these communities, with this over-policing, with this surveilling, to see the young children take such a prominent role in making sure that the video was recorded. That was a young Black minor who did that, but also to see the type of trauma that our children are being subjected to. It gives us a blueprint on how we need to go in and make our communities decent and safe places to live. So those were some of the things, along with the fact that I believe that the defense of Derek Chauvin, his attorney, it gives us some understanding as to how well the cover-ups and the deceptions that are used by attorneys when they represent, when they're prosecuting us, they lie with straight faces, they cover up evidence. And this is what we saw, I believe, with Derek Chauvin's attorney. He had to represent his client, but as what we saw with our own eyes didn't often match up to what he was saying. And this is what we see often in the courts of America when they are persecuting Black people. A lot of lies, mischaracterizations, and cover-ups, which really just makes the system rotten, in my opinion. So,
I agree. And may I piggyback on Sister Pamela? I also think that the fact that they got law enforcement to testify against former Officer Chauvin's behavior was really what kind of took them over. It was what was so compelling, because I believe America still wants to believe in police and the police culture and the police system. And so we needed to see, Americans needed to see good police saying, oh, this is one of those bad apples. And although everybody is trying not to make this a bad apple situation, I believe that the defense and this trial kind of highlighted that whole illusion or delusion that this is just, once in a while, somebody loses their mind, somebody gets on the police academy that shouldn't be. No, I think that the whole American police system is set up to protect white supremacy and to, keep Black people oppressed. And it is never meant to be the opposite. That's why Mr. Chauvin looked so surprised even when they said guilty, So I think that, that's a part of what we have never seen before, is that the police broke the line and started testifying against one of their own.
Yeah, go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, peace. I just wanted to add a couple of comments. I, for one, really did not celebrate the verdict because I saw it in a sense as though Derek Chauvin was the sacrificial lamb. They had, and the first day of the trial, I saw the zeal which with the prosecutors went after him. I knew it was a foregone conclusion they were going to convict him. And they pretty much had to, as Reverend Attorney Arif said, they're on the world stage. And not only did this video go viral, here played all over the world. So they had to try to present the facade that they would actually seek justice. So it wasn't so much as seeking justice, they did what was prudent for them to try to uphold, as Sister Mellissa said, the architecture of white supremacy by sacrificing this quote unquote bad apple. So I didn't see any need to celebrate it. And I think that also shows us just how far we have to go, and what has been done to us in over 400 years is that we have seen so little justice that even the first ray of what might be justice gives us cause to celebrate, when it should just be a matter of fact of the right thing being done as it should have been done. So I think that we have to keep in mind just that we have been denied justice for so long that just even a ray of light makes us want to go out and celebrate. I would not be surprised to see the next officer accused of killing a Black man be found not guilty. And back to things as usual, now that they've made an example of Derek Chauvin. So I don't really see a sea change taking place in the justice system as it pertains to police officers harming and killing Black people.
And that's one of the reasons I wanted to kind of have this discussion on this topic right now, because if you all would recall, like during the trial, leading up into the trial, I think this was on the news every day. You had, legal commentaries and, just everybody talking about the trial and this and that. And now I don't know if I've heard anything concerning, the trial. The punishment phase or anything that, that's being discussed, because of course we, begin to go and move on to the next thing. We had, the murder the same day as the verdict came down. And so for me, in like you all, in being in this day to day, I did not take on the stance like I have to be glued to the TV and watch this all the time. Because I was telling people that's kind of what we do. We experience, it's not sensationalized to us, it's like real. And it's life, and this is what we do. And so some people, unfortunately, have been so infatuated with it, so to speak, in terms of the trial and, the experience in the courtroom because of TV and all of that. And you get, people saying, well, they should have did this or they should have did that. I knew from the beginning, based on the way that the charges came down, that there was an intention to get a conviction, just based on the type of charges that were there. And so I, that kind of, went through my mind as I'm looking at the prosecution and all of that. Not necessarily impressed with them, because I think we see this all the time with the way that they prosecute us. We're typically on the other side. I think we all were kind of just disgusted when we saw the prosecution of the Trayvon Martin incident, murder, that we knew as professionals and practitioners that there was no intention of really trying to get a conviction from the outset, and looking at that. So I thought this was a little different by the way that the prosecutor came forward in terms of the actual charges that were put in place and how the case was presented during the trial, that there was an intention on trying to get a conviction in some sort of way, which we're not accustomed to. We're accustomed to being on the other side, but they didn't really do anything unusual in terms of prosecuting a case of this sort, because that's typically what they would do when they would come against, some people that we represent. What was very, I think, to me, uncomfortable was, I think, as Sister Pamela was saying, the mechanisms and the way procedurally that the defense attorney was able to, try to combat some of the things that were being presented based on the charges, and that I could see that he may have been, able to be successful in that regards, based on, how we're able to present a case in the alternative side as far as that reasonable doubt that is created. And so I also want to talk about, we've all seen the video, and it's just traumatizing, I think, for everyone every time we look at it. But what role did social media play in the trial And what role will it continue to play, you all think, in the trials, or hopefully the continued convictions of officers that are engaged in abuse and misconduct?
Well,
Well,
let me start.
Oh, go ahead, brother. I'm sorry. Beg your pardon.
Let me start by saying, first of all, I wanted to, before I respond to that question, to address what Sister Pamela said earlier and what you were saying, Sister Qiana. See, behind behind Derek Chauvin's defense lawyer was the mind of white supremacy. We heard all of the reasons that the police give to justify killing us. He was on drugs. He was resisting. He gave a fake $20 bill. All of these normal, when you heard the attorney give his excuses, he was giving the crowd was threatening. There was fear of the crowd or angry mob. All of these things that are thoughts of white supremacy that they utilize so that they can justify why they kill us. Clearly, we're in the age of social media. We remember before social media, the great Rodney King case, where it wasn't social media, it was a video camera, but the event was striking no less. And all of us who were alive, which I believe we all were at the time, watched this and watched how the defense counsel was able to move the case to Cerritos, California, which is predominantly white, where they could get an all-white jury who are always believing in the police because they are trained to see us as savages. See, we're not really addressing the idea of what goes on in these police departments. Even with the Nation of Islam, I know for a fact, as General Counsel for the Nation of Islam, we're used with among them to try to suggest that we're some hate group or we're some kind of violent group or that we're some kind of group that would do harm to someone. We know this is a lie, but this is how they're trained. They're also trained to look at us in the community as animals and savages, and their job is to keep us contained within the ghetto and let us kill one another. So you got to deal with the mind of white supremacy here, because that is the mind of how policemen are taught in these communities. And I want to address that because social media today is great. And it was, in this case was so egregious, the use of social media was very, very powerful, and it should continue to be a powerful tool, I believe, if we continue to exercise our First Amendment rights. Did you have a right to record as long as you don't interfere? I would say to us as another thought, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan have done several articles on this issue of policing. And I wanted to show you this book was written by one of our researchers, Brother Demetric Muhammad. Is an excellent book, How to Police the Black Community. And it's a book that chronicles the articles of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad in the 60s dealing with Black policing, and several articles from the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. So in your community organizations and what have you, it'd be good to have this book to be given guidance into the mind of how we as a Black community deal with the police. One thing I think that we should do, and I'm an advocate of this, when I worked in Washington, D.C. in Mayor Marion Barry's administration, the mayor that the enemy hated more than any mayor that I've known in recent times, and the wickedness that they did to that man in that city, I worked for him. But one thing he did, one of the reasons why he was hated is because he dealt with the white police in Washington, D.C. And he had the city council pass a law that if you didn't live in the District of Columbia, you couldn't be a police officer in D.C. There was a residency requirement that said you had to live in the city where you police. Now, of course, the white police were outraged because many of them lived across the line in the state of Virginia, but he required that. And of course, being the mayor, he could hire a Black police chief, and he could hire a man that would be one that would follow his point of view concerning the Black community. I'm saying this because sometimes we talk about the political system there is some benefit at a local level, particularly when you have a large Black population, where you put in office council people, as Elijah Muhammad said, who are sympathetic to our cause, who want to do justice. You put a mayor in Baltimore, my hometown. You have a sister that is constantly being attacked, Marilyn Mosby, who ran to be the state attorney of Maryland. I knew her predecessor for many years, Kwesi, not Kwesi Mfume, but he became the mayor, Kurt Schmoke. Before Kurt Schmoke became the mayor of Baltimore, he was the state's attorney. But the point is, you have to have your people who are sympathetic to the community, and particularly in the Black community. At some point, we need to start talking about politically creating a police force in our community, because we can't trust the police that are outside of our community. And I'm telling you, I live here in Chicago now. The University of Chicago has a parallel police force with the Metropolitan Police of Chicago. A university. The legislature granted the university authority to create a police force with full police powers. I'm talking about guns, vehicles. They can make arrests of citizens. They have authority, like any policeman in Chicago called CPD. We have to start looking at the policing of our community, because we can't trust those who are being sent in to police us, because as the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said, we are living under the shadow of death, and their aim is to kill us. So these are just some thoughts that I wanted to share.
I have some thoughts on
also. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, dear.
no,
And
go
on
ahead.
that also, we're as we're talking about, the mindset, as Brother Arif was mentioning, and Sister Pamela and I have talked about this on a number of occasions. Anytime, and as we all know, that there is a police involved shooting and the officers give an interview on television or a statement in the newspapers or what have you, one of the first things they say is, we were in fear for our lives, or in fear for our safety or the safety of others. Well, that's part and parcel that goes right in line with these use of force curriculums and manuals throughout the country. And particularly, I know this here in Harris County, Texas, and also the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement. The officers are trained in these ways so that if the factors that they are taught to use in determining and in using their discretion as to whether or not to use lethal force or any kind of force, they can take into consideration the height, the weight, the size of the crowd. Those are the different things that we also saw was being raised in the Chauvin trial. And those are the things, and I continue to say this to people, if we're going to do something at the legislative level, we have got to have these use of force curriculums and use of force manuals rewritten so that the officers cannot continue to use their unbridled discretion. Because if you have that and you continue to use unbridled discretion with the mindset toward white supremacy and hatred to the Black community, you're always going to have these types of situations. And when they use these phrases that we were in fear for our safety and these different things, as I've always said, they are tainting a potential jury pool. And so the people you hear that are citizens, we hear those things. So now we're on a trial. I'm sorry, we're a juror, whether it's a civil trial because the officer has been accused of misconduct, and we file a federal lawsuit or state lawsuit in state court. The main thing that people are going to hear, or even if an officer is charged criminally, the potential jurors will go back and think, well, what did officer so-and-so say? He was in fear for his safety. So now, in my mind as a potential juror, or even now if I'm on the jury, I'm going to think now and remember what I heard the officer say in the news, what I read the officer as being quoted in the newspaper, and forget that foolishness that some of us know. You hear the judges during jury voir dire talking about, well, can you put your personal views aside? As a friend was telling me, where are you going to put your view? You're going to put it in your pocket? That's not going to happen. That's unrealistic. We're going to bring our personal experiences and values to the deliberation room. And the thing is that until we be able to scale back this unbridled discretion with these use of force manuals and the use of force trainings, we potentially will continue to have these issues.
I'd like to comment on that, Sister Qiana.
Oh, okay.
I think the issue about social media is very important. Like you said, the taping of these encounters as well, because when I started practicing law in the 90s, it's very interesting. We would get calls all the time from people complaining about excessive force, people being beat up in prisons, people being, our clients would tell us how the incident where the police was brutalizing or had beat them up, but it always came down to their word against your word. So what we're seeing now is nothing new. These cases where this police excessive force and the murdering of our brothers and sisters, this is something that has been a part of the fabric of America. I mean, there's a book that we study in the nation, or it's called The Secret Relationship Between Blacks and Jews. And one of the things they brought out is that, see, this is lynching masquerading as crime fighting. And this is what was done during Reconstruction, where, and really it's the base of some of the laws that are being used to actually prosecute these cases. The actual 1983 law that a lot of the civil lawsuits are filed against these police officers for acting what they call under the color of state law. These were the same laws that were used when the Klan, were these deputies, and they would actually go out and murder people using their state authority. So some people talk about the Casual Killing Act, where it was lawful for a person who owned a slave to kill that person if they just so happened they were trying to maybe discipline them, and because we were seen as chattel and property. So again, going back to George Floyd's trial, I think the ludicrousy of actually the state having to prove that a handcuffed man was of no threat, and the meticulousness in which they really had to lay out these elements to also show what the cause of death was. Because as Brother Arif said, we got all those stereotypical lies about, superhuman strength as what they used with Michael Brown. With George, they tried to say some ridiculous causes of action, defenses, justifications, as Brother Athill is saying, but these things aren't new. And so the use of social media, witnesses, intervention, and at some point, we're going to have to figure out how to protect ourselves against this lethal force that's being brought into our communities, because we can't continue to be just slaughtered. And just one last thing with that, because even it goes into other areas of law, because what you see is discretion. These people have unfettered, unchecked discretion. So when they're removing our children from their homes, see the lies that they're making up to justify what they're doing. These are the same lies that they're making up when they're pouncing on us and surveilling us and targeting us in these communities. And it's just gotten to a point where, as the final call, the front page of the final call asks, how much more can we stand? And I just, I think we're at a point now where America, Black people are seeing we can't continue to live under the shadow of death, because it is a genocidal plot. So I just wanted to put that out there as well, sis.
And if I may add to the connection with social media and the
Yes.
success of the prosecution, I'll say that it's different from the recording that we had with Rodney King, where the homeowner had his video camera just pointing. With social media, when you record something, you also have your narrative and your opinion, your caption, your opinions, and then you share it with your network and your platform. And so it gets people involved. I think in the past, the white silence, and even sometimes the fact that Black people have just been conditioned to be mistreated, kind of made us or allowed us to turn a blind eye to it. It wasn't directly affecting our circle of influence. But now our circles of influence are so overlapping with the social media. And you have these young people, like the 9-year-old who said something wasn't right, or the 17-year-old's like, I can't do anything, but I'm gonna record it. And then we're able to hear everybody else saying, please get off of them, please. And we're hearing the crowd. And so now, at least we're giving the powers that be the awareness that we're watching. And if they want to be reelected, even if they don't care about us, perhaps maybe they should pay some attention to this. And I think that's why the world was glued to the TV for 365 days, is because we had to watch it. It was nothing that we could excuse as, you know, a snap decision, or they didn't have the benefit of cool reflection. We didn't have to adopt what the officer said about being in fear. We didn't have to adopt that because we watched. And everybody watched, and there were 4 of them. And so I think that this particular case, Mr. Floyd's killing on social media, and with the influence of the social media, gave it the fire, at least as what everybody has said, to let them know that they had to seek a conviction in that. And moving forward, I think that social media can help create a fabric of community policing, where we encourage each other not to call the police for everything, or, you know, to avail ourselves to other services, to watch out for mental health issues, or to make sure that our police officers know that that is Miss Debbie's boy who's coming home at 11 o'clock versus just a scary 6-foot, you know, person that they're saying that they're afraid of. I think that social media giving us a direct vision into the lives and the interaction with police is giving us the benefit of moving this forward.
And
Just
I'm
Qiana?
going to, yes, and I'm going to say that I agree with you on that as far as the opening up the circle. And I think it also helps to humanize the victim, because we saw it in real time. And then we have these words and these things that are said, you know, in the courtroom, in the legal arena, about excessive force and all of that. But it really helps to get an understanding when you are able to look and see for yourself with your own eyes, how does that play out? And we can give, you know, in the jury instructions, they say, well, this is this and that is that. But as a person looking, and I think a comedian said it in jest, but I said people are really understanding in terms of the law and the sense that it makes in terms of what it is that you're trying to interpret the law to me, and what it is that I see. And the comedian says that we're talking about excessive force, but the officer had his hands in his pocket. He said, you never see anybody in a fight with their hands in their pocket. And he said, just in the hood, who fights with their hands in their pocket? So you use this legal terminology about excessive force and fear and all of this, but it does now come to the point where people have a better understanding when they're able to visualize what it is that you're trying to teach me, right? Now with social media, it's all encompassing, where I'm seeing it in real time, and it is not really coming together in terms of what it is that you're trying to portray to me in the courtroom to believe what this is supposed to mean. And it gets away from the he said, she said, because I don't really have to listen to who said what, right? I'm able to visualize and see it and observe it for myself. And I think that as attorneys, some of the things we've had to deal with in terms of the character of the witness sometimes, because a lot of people that we have the opportunity to, defend and try to represent they don't get the benefit of the doubt based on their character or people they hang around with or life experiences or history or anything like that. So you now, are justified in believing someone who you think, is a more truthful person, a more honorable person, so to speak, than believing, our victim. And so with social media, with recording, with putting things on real time, on Instagram, on Facebook, I get to assess the situation for myself as a potential juror, or even, just as a person in the community who's able to now become a part of the situation, right? Go ahead.
Yes. Well, for one, I want to take sort of a contrarian view concerning the Chauvin's defense attorney, because I've been in his shoes before, and I'm sure Mellissa and those of us who practice criminal law, he had nothing. So all he could do was try to throw something against the wall and see what would stick. And I'm sure he would have preferred to have negotiated a plea for Derek Chauvin, and the state probably refused to offer anything close to something that he could take, which they will do when they want to go to when they actually want to go to trial and seek the maximum amount of punishment. So he really didn't have anything but to throw things against the wall and see if something would stick. But I think what it boils down to in terms of this theme or narrative of they were afraid or in fear of us, I believe in many cases they actually are, because it is part of our natures as natural enemies. They are natural enemies to the Black man, and we're their natural enemies. They are natural enemies to us, and we are the gods of the universe. They do fear us. When I was a child in the 60s, I must have been 6 or 7 years old. My older cousin, was killed by police who shot him in the back. And I saw it on the autopsy, shot him in the left back. They claimed that he was fighting them and they were shooting in self-defense. But I know for a fact they were afraid of him, and probably for good reason, because he would beat their behind. So it goes to that we're living with a people that is disagreeable, and it's impossible to live with them in peace. And until we get that through our head and start to take the steps, as Brother Arif alluded to earlier, start to take the steps to separate ourselves from them, this drama will play out over and over and over again, because it is a relationship that was not designed to operate peacefully and to the mutual benefit of both parties. So there has to be a separation.
And in terms of
and I'd like to say one last thing.
Mm-hmm.
There's a, and maybe Brother Art can help, or maybe one of you could help out. There's a passage in the Supreme Wisdom where it talks about the value of the air selling price of a quantity of air. And I remember reading that and pondering, what could they possibly be talking about in this particular problem? But now we see social media, which is really the selling and the utilization of airtime. Mm. And what social media is doing is creating our trial exhibits for us. As a civil trial attorney and in criminal defense, we strive to have as many trial exhibits that can paint pictures to the jury as we can. And social media is actually creating our trial exhibits.
Right. And so what's the difference? You just brought up the criminal and civil liability. Now we're talking about procedurally during this criminal case in the Chauvin trial. The next phase is the sentencing phase, right? And so what is the difference between him being held criminally liable and then those who want to make sure that they are held he's held civilly liable as well, concerning, compensation and different things. And how do you all address that, in terms of, do they go together? Do they not go together? The evidence that's been presented in the criminal trial, does it make a difference?
Well, I would say this, that in this case, obviously, we know that they already settled before the trial started in terms of a civil amount, which is probably one of the larger ones that I've heard about in terms of the amount of money, 26 million or 27 million, some figure like that. But ordinarily, when you have a decision about the criminal versus the civil, you want to kind of see how the criminal starts to play out, because hopefully you want to have a criminal conviction. However, we do know, if we remember OJ, the OJ case, he was found not guilty criminally, which meant that he walked away. But then they turned around and sued him civilly on the basis of saying he should be held responsible for the murder. Of course, we know that in criminal law, the standard is guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, and the jurors have to all agree together as to the guilt or innocence, unless you have a hung jury. I can tell you, y'all heard me tell this story about my own life, where police attempted to kill me when I was a teenager. And fortunately, I was able to get away, but when I had my trial, 11 jurors found me guilty, but one Black woman, the only Black woman on the jury, found me not guilty. She did not believe it. And it was true that I never committed the crime that I was being charged with. And that one Black woman saved me from being a felon. The 11 whites said I was guilty, and their view of my being guilty, they thought I was a smart, you-know-what. I was a smart N, because I was beating the prosecution up the whole time he was trying to cross-examine me. I took the stand in my own defense. But the one Black woman felt, and she was a school teacher, she refused to cave in. And so because of that, I walked away with a hung jury, and ultimately we were able to politically negotiate that I never would be tried again. I went and got Perrin Mitchell from the Mitchell family, very powerful in Maryland. Point I'm making is that standard, guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. In civil, it's by preponderance of the evidence. I don't even think it's clear and convincing evidence. I think it's a preponderance of the evidence, more likely than not. And so when you go civil, it's a lesser standard, but you would like to have a guilty verdict in the other one. But of course, with Mr. OJ and the outrage and the incensed nature of them saying he was guilty, even though it was determined that he was not, the jury already had that mind that he was responsible. And so they found him more likely than not to have committed the crime and hit him with a $33 million judgment. So it's different standards, no doubt, but I would prefer to certainly have a conviction, but there's nothing that precludes me from moving forward. It's just a question of timing. Do you want to go at the same time? Do you wish to wait to see how this thing unfolds? These are decisions that you make with your client as to how you wish to proceed.
And I was looking at how things have now kind of transpired, where you are seeing a lot of civil settlements and different things coming down because of the abuse and the misconduct, but we don't see a lot of criminal prosecutions. And so I think they're more willing to, on the back end, on the financial side of it, to now, I think, be held accountable or take responsibility of some sort. But we still have not seen it play out in the criminal justice arena, based on the many murders that has transpired. I don't know how many criminal prosecutions we've actually even seen, how many people have even been charged without protesting and continued pressure and loss of lives just, to try to get a charge in place. So what do you all think in terms of, being criminal defense attorneys? What do you all think about that and why that is as far as the criminal side and the criminal, the civil and the criminal prosecution of these officers?
Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
What I like to point out is, and really, I don't understand why the attorneys would settle the civil case prior to the criminal case, even though it may be a large settlement. The question is, are you leaving any money on the table? Are you maximizing the amount of compensation? Because in a civil trial, there are special issues are submitted, and the jury has to rule on each segment of the damages. So there's a dollar figure that goes to pain and suffering. And with that exhibit that was created, that video of 9 minutes with that man's knee on his neck, you calculate the amount of compensation for the pain and suffering. And then you go to the mental anguish, which is separate from the pain and suffering. And what kind of mental anguish did he suffer? He's calling out for his mother as he breathed his last breath. That shows the anguish that he was suffering from. So I, if it were me, I don't think I would have settled the case prior to a trial, because the exhibits were made. Now you've got, as Brother Arif said, you've got evidence that's already been admitted in the criminal trial. You can use that evidence in the civil trial as well. And it would have been a lay down to go and try that case in the civil court. So I don't really understand that tactic. It may have been right, may have been wrong. It's a decision made. But that's kind of what I had to say. The civil case plays out, and there's a lower burden of proof. It's by preponderance of evidence rather than beyond a reasonable doubt. So that's why you see sometimes, even if they're not successful in the criminal case, they can still be successful in the civil case, as was the case with O.J. Simpson.
And I'd just like to say that from my perspective, the difference is that the citizens of Minnesota or Minneapolis paid for the $27 million to the Floyd family. And so Mr. Chauvin was never even held financially responsible. So even when there's a civil judgment from the city and they're quick to write a check, it still doesn't really hold the person who committed the offense liable, even civilly, because of qualified immunity. And we got to get rid of that, because if there's an officer who wants to kill a Black man, he can do so and maybe get away with it criminally and probably civilly, and probably even keep his job or go to another department where they had to report it and get another job and keep on. So I don't think that the civil case ever really holds anybody responsible except for the people who had nothing to do with it.
And even with that, as Sister Mellissa just said, also that, when you file these civil matters, and particularly in federal court, just as Sister Mellissa just said, the defense that they always raise is immunity. And that's what actually one of the things that happened in Kentucky. I was on a webinar some months ago, and I was asked the question, whether or not I thought that the matter that was happening in Kentucky. And I was asked the question whether or not I thought what the Attorney General, I believe it was, for the state of Kentucky was saying, that the officers did nothing wrong. And I agreed with that. And of course, everybody, on the panel was saying, what are you talking about? How can you agree with it? Well, it goes right back to what I was saying. They didn't do anything wrong according to the policy. And that is, again, where I continue to say it's these policies and these use of force things. Now, also with respect, another difference when you're dealing with the differences between the civil and the criminal, no matter what. Now, I know here in Harris County, Texas, for those who might be watching, who may not be here, we know sometimes a criminal allegation, it takes a while before it actually, let's say, gets to trial. But the statute of limitations for a civil matter, Section 1983, violation of civil rights, that doesn't stop, if you will. It's a 2-year statute of limitations. So you have to still go ahead and file the case. Now, I agree with Brother Warren also. Doesn't mean that you have to settle it, but you cannot necessarily wait and play. Okay, well, I'll wait to file the lawsuit, depending upon what happens on the criminal level. If indeed, let's say, an officer is charged, because if you miss that statute of limitations by 1 day, nothing you can do about it. And so that is a big difference. But, as Brother Warren was saying too, the beautiful thing now with social media, dovetailing or going back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier, is that, now the evidence that we have, sometimes it works to our disadvantage too, though.
Right.
But the evidence is certainly right before us there, that it's a little bit easier. Again, it goes back to what we were saying, even when, a juror is asked the question, well, can you put what you've seen, or can you put your personal feelings or experiences aside? Well, how are you going to put back, what I already saw? So sometimes that evidence that we see that comes across or comes through social media can sometimes be a good and a bad thing, but we have to know, to use it, to our advantage. And it's interesting, as Brother Warren also said, about, Chauvin's defense counsel. And, Professor Washington, one of my other mentors who was on, our webinar, previous webinars, always used to tell me, he said, there's one thing, when you have the facts for you, you argue the facts. When you have the law for you, you argue the facts. But when you don't have the law or the facts, you just argue. There you go. And that is what I saw, Derek Chauvin's attorney doing, So it was an interesting thing here.
I want to just
I just have to say, if I
go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to say on that point as well, I think there's a certain level of integrity that we are being charged with as attorneys. We cannot suborn perjury or, push lies in the courtroom. And I think, as the minister, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, he, in an article, he was viewing the impeachment proceedings of, I believe it was then President Trump, and some of the artsmanship that he saw these lawyers doing. We as lawyers, we know that lawyers lie and carry on, but I think to some of the lay people, that is just deplorable. The minister, he just said, the lawyers that lying lawyers, who are actually not really caring about the truth, but you're just really just pushing a lie. So I think that is something that I saw, that we as Black attorneys, we may defend our clients zealously, but at some point, it's always based on some factual reality as opposed to some just blatant racist theory, which is what I think we saw in that case. And I also just wanted to say real quick on this liability, the civil lawsuits versus criminal prosecutions. I, for one, I like the power of a civil lawsuit as well. And I think sometimes we are not the victims, the families who have lost their loved ones, and of course they deserve to be compensated for that loss monetarily, but it doesn't replace, unfortunately, the lost life. And I believe sometimes these civil lawsuits are in a unique position to uncover just the corruption and the illegalities on which these systems operate, because these civil liability, the causes of action, we're talking about patterns and practices. We're talking about things that we know these police agencies have done for at least 50, 60 years, 100 years. And so therefore, we're not looking at just a one isolated incident where an officer might cover up for another officer or an officer may exercise excessive force. We're looking at policies that have allowed for that, where people have turned their backs. Like, for example, I think Ahmaud Arbery, the brother who was murdered in Georgia, the lynching of our brother Ahmaud Arbery, his family filed a civil lawsuit immediately, as well as, of course, we know those men have now been even charged with hate crimes. But some of the allegations that were in that lawsuit, civil lawsuits give you a lot of latitude. So he could talk about some of the phone calls that were being made, the relationships between the prosecutor and some of those defendants. He can really go into the corruption and the conspiracy and the bad actions that are happening on these streets that, again, these people are being paid taxpayer dollars to kill us and to keep us under, subjugation. So I think that the civil lawsuits are important because, of course, in a criminal law setting, you're going to be somewhat confined. Like, we didn't hear a lot about how George Chauvin, his body camera was somehow underneath the car. He didn't even have it on at some point. And I think in a civil setting, we could have, in a civil lawsuit setting, we could have actually talked about some of the background. We could have made some allegations and talked about some of the wrongdoings and faults. So I think those things are very important as it relates to civil lawsuits as well. So
I love all the, go ahead.
I want to follow back up on this qualified immunity issue. Thank Brother Warren, Sister Pamela, and all who spoke. Sister Pamela. Okay. Can y'all see me?
We can. Go ahead.
Good. Of course, we know that in Chauvin's case, there's no qualified immunity for him because he was fired because his conduct was outside of clearly established law, which was a major part of the prosecution showing and having the police chief and other police trainers come to show that he would not at all be able to raise the bar of qualified immunity because his conduct was outside of the orbit of clearly established law. And I do think when we think about a civil trial in this matter, because Derek Chauvin didn't have to take the witness stand because of his Fifth Amendment privilege that he could invoke. But in a civil trial, after the case was over and he's found guilty, now he can be deposed. He can be brought to the witness stand in a sense, and he could have been questioned because some of the things that we knew about him never came to the light of the jurors, such as his past relationship and interaction with George Floyd. He had it in for the brother. He did not like him. They both worked at a club, and he was an off-duty policeman, and he and George Floyd had some engagements that were not pleasant. So there was some history here that really would go to show the motive and the real reason and the maliciousness and the hatred behind him killing George Floyd, and because of this past history. So you're right, it could have been even more impactful, not only with the footage, but actually putting Chauvin on the witness stand and deposing him to address some of these other issues. Now, we know we have the George Floyd Policing Act that is still being, I guess, debated in the Senate.
Right.
And one of the things that bothers me is I hear that there seems to be some kind of a view to back away from the qualified immunity strand.
Right. That's the major.
That's tremendously troubling to me because that is the issue. The number one issue of all of this is getting rid of these qualified immunities from these police officers because that's what they hide behind. So if we're talking about an effective George Floyd Policing Act, qualified immunity has to be repealed. Heck, if they can repeal religious exemptions because they want you to take a vaccine and deny you your right to say I have a religious exemption to not take this vaccine. The government can deny you that, but yet they won't take away from police officers the very thing that they hide behind, which is this qualified immunity, which gives them the right to kill us. I just hope and pray that the Senate does not cave in. I even heard, I think I heard the gentleman from South Carolina, the black man, the third one in the line of the Democrats, who's from South Carolina, mentioned something about they're willing to look at that. We should really not allow them to water down that law, because if you take away qualified immunity, that's really the issue in terms of police reform. And so I hope that they would remain strong on that and push it through as it ought to be pushed through. They got enough senators, 51 to 50 if it comes to that, to get this law passed, which is, by the way, as an aside, and I conclude on that point, why they don't want that Sister Kristen Clark to be head of the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department, because she would hold them accountable, and they are not interested in having no black woman sit in that seat in the Justice Department. So they try to malign her and vilify her against police and against others to try to stop her from being in a position that gives her the authority to now go after some of these voting issues that are going on in these states, the illegalities of these legislatures that they're doing in terms of voter restriction. So all of this goes back again to living under the shadow of death. They hate the black man and woman and don't want to give us justice, so they fight us at every turn. So at some point, we're going to have to come to the mind to understand that we're not going to be able to live in peace with this people. We're going to have to go for ourselves in a separate state and territory of our own, either here or elsewhere.
And we have a question from our listening audience, who I'm thankful is taking all of this in. And you guys are just offering some very good perspectives on these questions and on the trial and just the criminal justice system. And they're listening and they have questions for you all. One of the questions is, do you all think that the criticism of people like Attorney Benjamin Crump and others is fair based on the roles that they play in so many cases?
When you say criticism, what do you mean?
I don't know. That's why I was thinking from the question, but this must be something that's out there. A viewer has asked, do we think that the criticism is fair concerning attorney?
Let me just, Brother Ben Crump, his role when it comes to the police killings, that's really not his side other than advocacy. In representing the family and ensuring, God willing, that the prosecutor's department, the state's attorneys, who the officials are of that state, and the police departments will do that which is proper to prosecute. He's not, even the family is not a participant in that. So I want people to understand, in these kind of situations, the family is not the one that's in a position to determine or to decide how this thing goes along criminally.
Right.
That's the prosecution. However, a brother like Ben Crump, with his voice and with his being recognized, can come to the city, or Reverend Sharpton can come to a city to give light to it, to give more national exposure to it, to help to bring more pressure to organize the community, to try to make sure that the prosecution and the police department releases the tape, shows what it is, and that the prosecutor charges properly, and then they oversee that. But of course, ultimately, he's representing the family. So then on the civil side is more where he has more authority in terms of his posture. So I want people to understand the different roles, because you may be misunderstanding what his ability is in these type of matters.
Great response. Thank you. Go ahead, Attorney Morris.
I agree with Brother Arif, because I worked with Mr. Crump on a case in Galveston where Mr. Neely was being walked with between these horses. And I was representing Mr. Neely on the criminal matter and then Mr. Crump on the civil matter. And the attention that he brought to the case and the power that he brought to the case, where the DOJ is calling and asking us, what do we want out of Galveston? I think that people underestimate because they're unaware of what he is actually doing. So what his role is not, an advocate in the courtroom, as you might perceive, but he does bring about the attention and the reverence to the case that it needs.
And also, we have another question concerning dealing with the criminal justice system. And the viewer asks, what can we do to protect ourselves from this wicked justice system?
Nothing.
Well, we say it like this, Sister Qiana. We are taught to respect the laws of this land. We should do our very best, and I say this to our people. We know that it's not a justice system for us. It's like Richard Pryor said, it's just us. There, and as Reverend Sharpton likes to say, no justice, no peace. Here's the point. That we just talked about under the shadow of death. There is not in their heart to give us justice. So the first thing we have to do is to try to ensure as best we can that we don't fall victim or fall into the trap of the enemy, that he can use his law. The scripture says they frame mischief by means of law. So we're taught to obey the law and to be righteous and to respect the laws of the land as far as they don't conflict with our religion. So be obedient to the law as best you can. The other part is that once you get in their trap, you have to be wise. It's like we tell brothers and sisters who are in prison, you can't be but so chesty when you're under their authority. They have you under their grip. So Jesus says to his disciples, be wise as the serpent, but gentle as a dove. Your goal is to extricate yourself from the situation. Don't allow the enemy to use the power of his law on you. The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan gave us a beautiful example in his book called 7 Speeches when the police pulled him over, and he was very hostile towards the minister, but the minister was able to de-escalate the situation by being respectful, taking the ticket from the man and said, thank you, sir, and went on about his way, because he didn't give the enemy what? The excuse to do what was in his heart to do. So we say to our people, do your very best to be law-abiding, and at the same time, if you are caught in that, be wise, because your goal is to live and fight another day, not to let your ego get in the way where the enemy can use his force to kill you.
Go ahead, Attorney Norris.
I hate going behind him, but I would add that individually, if you're being pulled over, there's an app. If you have an Apple, you say, hey Siri, I'm being pulled over, it starts recording. Excellent. So definitely I want you to record as best you can, but do not reach for your phone. Individually, I believe that any interaction with the police can be a slippery slope into life-ending or life-ruining consequences. So remember that even if you are a lawyer, you're not a lawyer in that interaction. You fight in the courtroom. I have yet to see anybody be choked to death or hanged or shot in court. But out when the police have the gun and the target is on your back, what I would say is be as compliant as possible. But we saw with Mr. Floyd that sometimes, but be as compliant as possible, but avoid interaction. Keep your PC out of their business. Keep your stickers right. Don't speed, follow the rules, as Brother Arif said. But then if you happen to find yourself arrested, gone are the days where you tell your children, I'm not bonding you out, go get your baby. Make sure that they have an attorney. Everybody can get an attorney, even if you can't afford one. Make sure that they have an attorney, and the time to fight the justice system is not when you're in the belly of the beast, but outside when we're organizing our communities. Get to know your neighbors, remind your friends and family. Don't call the police if you haven't seen me. Come knock. Hey, come check on me. get a plan in place so that you're not calling the police every time there's something suspicious. Make sure that your neighbors are not suspicious to you and you're not suspicious to them. Teach your children not to be afraid of the police, but to not have anything to do with them. You don't have no business with the police. That's all I can say right now.
And on that, you know, what I, and some of our, you know, particularly, you know, we learn, as Sister Qiana would say, and all of us would say, we learn a lot from the people we represent as well. And what I have told people, because I dealt with the situation a few years ago, right around the time that, you know, this incident with Sandra Bland down in Waller County, Texas, which is outside, for anybody who doesn't know, which is about 45 minutes an hour outside of Houston. Well, this young lady that I was representing, she was pulled over. She was coming back from, I believe it was Dallas, and she was driving on Interstate 45. And she was pulled over by the by DPS, which is, you know, the state troopers here in Texas. Issued a ticket citation for speeding, whatever the situation may have been. 15 minutes after that, she's being pulled over again. And naturally, she didn't know the differences between the jurisdictions, as it turned out. But the bottom line is, and I now tell everybody who I represent, you know, in situations like this, you have your cell phone. It's fine to call your mom. It's fine to call your dad. But I tell people, call 911. And that has worked, because what happens is, she was explaining when she was pulled over again and had the 911 dispatch, and she's not pulling over. And the dispatch is telling her, you know, pull over, you know, and she puts on her hazards, so that she could not be charged with evading detention in a motor vehicle, which here in Texas is a felony. It was a strip of I-45 where it was poorly lit. She's explaining to the dispatch what happened. She was just pulled over 15 minutes before, and she finally gets then to a better lit area. She stops, the police come, everything is still with 911 dispatch. She explains to the officers in a calm manner what happened. The officers then tell her, we, a different law enforcement agency, whatever the situation was, we got involved. And by Allah's grace and permission, she didn't receive any citation for the second thing, and was offered, and we secured for her a formal letter of apology because of that. Now, I've also represented another young man who took that advice to call 911 when he was being harassed by the police. And so I don't want people to think it's kind of, you know, that you just call 911 and everything is fine. The officer was actually heard on the 911 recording saying to the young man I was representing, oh, do you think the 911 dispatch is going to believe you? Well, the thing is, that's all recorded on 911, which by law has to be preserved. I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Sister Mellissa, I believe it's either 30 days or 90 days. So any persons who are on the line representing people accused of crimes, or even in a civil rights matter where you have to get 911 recording, make sure you get it right away. So because by law, they have to keep it for a certain number of days. But the bottom line is, call 911 dispatch. That cannot be destroyed, you know, and it's their own evidence. So in even that regard, as Brother Warren was alluding to a little earlier, that's their evidence, which would even be a little bit better and a little bit easier to be admitted in a criminal prosecution and or even a civil matter. So call 911 dispatch and have them, you know, have the recording going.
Great practical advice that you all are giving as well. And we're coming to a close, but I do want to ask, just for our audience, because we know that this is happening. Like I said, most of the time it's on the news, it's an incident, if not every day, every other day, that we're able to, you know, witness someone getting murdered. I mean, we can't even say shot anymore, you know, arrested. It's actually being murdered. by the police, and we have just rampant abuse that we're seeing, and it's just happening over and over and over again. And so what are the steps to follow to, make a complaint, or if I'm a witness to it, if I'm a victim of it, to be able to start to move forward in making sure that these things are addressed and your voice is heard, and things are being looked at and done. Where do you start with that?
Well, here in Texas, one of the things is that the legislature has passed that if you're going to file, let's say, a complaint with the law enforcement agency's internal affairs, an internal affairs complaint, you have to do that within 30 days. You have to give them notice. And then even if you're filing a civil lawsuit in federal court, the law requires that the agency, the law enforcement agency that you're complaining about, has been on notice. Now, I've been in cases where they've actually, argued, the law enforcement agencies have argued that we did not, give them notice in time. And so, notice would be that they were not aware is what it amounts to. Well, if the person I was representing was also accused of a criminal act, well, we've always been able to get around that because that is notice if the person is accused. Now, but having said that, if there was no criminal accusation, then you have to, here in the state of Texas, I was saying, file notice. And the notice is a simple letter or request for an internal affairs investigation, or just a simple letter request of to the law enforcement agent, the sheriff or the city, whoever, here it'd be the city of Houston, just letting them know, a letter of representation. That way you make sure that you don't get caught out there, if you will, and have something dismissed because you didn't follow any kind of procedure. The second thing is, on that line is, as I tell people, you have to, even if you don't, if the IAD investigation doesn't go anywhere, the thing is, again, it's notice. And so if you have so many complaints, let's say with the City of Houston Police Department talking about and arguing about, their use of force tactics. Well, now the City of Houston Police Department, or any police department for that matter, can now not come back and say we were not aware, we had no notice, because now there's a track record. As Sister Pamela was using the phrase earlier, there's a pattern and practice, and all of those things are a matter of public record. So I always say, if you are harassed by law enforcement, even if you don't think that the complaint will go anywhere, still file the complaint, because the more complaints that are filed, the less of an opportunity the law enforcement agencies will have to argue that they were unaware that this was going on in their precincts, that this was going on in their agencies. And then you're able to overcome that hurdle of lack of notice. So then, in furthering a 1983 civil rights violation, you'd be able to at least be closer to a favorable ruling.
Now, Sister Qiana, I would also say in this situation, going back to George Floyd, the horror of watching a man be killed. At some point, we're going to have to ask ourselves the question, are we going to stand there and watch this man be killed? But before we get to that, God willing, it would seem to me, again, this goes back to our community organizing and our power in our own communities to deal with our mayors, our city council people, because you see, there ought to be a system in place that where police is acting in such an egregious way like that, a supervisor should immediately be called and be dispatched to that area where that officer is engaged, because someone has to be in authority. I remember in '94 when the police attacked Mosque in 1994 in New York, and Mayor Giuliani had just become the mayor, and he had a new police chief who happened to know about the Muslims. but Giuliani had told him to get the SWAT and to have the SWAT shoot into the mosque building where children and women were. Fortunately, because he was aware of us, he didn't do it. But we ended up having to call deputy chiefs and supervisors. So there's got to be a system where their police need to have some, well, you call it community relations people that are supposed to go around. Well, that person should be like on an emergency dial, where when you see something like this and the call comes in through 911 that a police officer is exercising excessive force and it looks like he's about trying to kill this man, they have to be able to respond, or somebody needs to be able to respond to that situation in authority to intercede in that. Absent that, then I just, watching George Floyd and watching it from TV was horrific enough. Standing there to watch this, that's a whole nother kind of trauma and abuse and wickedness. And I want to say this in conclusion on this part. Let us not forget these other officers who were equally as culpable in the murder of George Floyd. So let us see what is going to happen with the three of them, because Chauvin became the focus, but the other three were equally as culpable because they participated substantially in that which produced his death. And so this is far from over in terms of the sentencing and in terms of the prosecution of the other three. And the question that I would have is whether or not the settlement pretty much exonerated all of them out of it, or was the settlement just on Chauvin alone? Because you had 4 police officers. So that's a thought. Did the settlement release all of them from any civil exposure, or was it just Chauvin himself? Of course, if you know the city, more than likely they would want it to be all of them, which again goes to the point of why this was done so quickly, that the city did not wish to be put on trial, and the wickedness of what they do being shown, particularly in Minneapolis, which now has a history of killing Black men in a very, very serious way. So I think that's an idea in your cities to talk to your mayors and get with your police. There needs to be a rapid response supervisor that when a call is coming in about abuse of police or excessive force, someone needs to respond to the scene.
Well, you guys have just been so informative today, and it's just been a great discussion. And I wanted the audience to know, and the listeners to understand, that we have not been lulled to sleep. This is not over. As he is saying, we're still really, I believe, going to the most important stage. We have, now seeing the ability to force a prosecution. And again, it was a forced prosecution of the officer who murdered our brother, and also numerous ones who are now, looking to go into that same direction. Hopefully, we're going to continue to apply the pressure, but don't let one conviction make you fall asleep again. And we're on the watch. We're in the courtrooms. We see it day to day. I'm talking about, this is a drop in the bucket. And so we are going to continue to bring, as much information that we can to you all, to keep you abreast of what's happening, and allow you to know what's really going on, and what's happening, and how to, effectively fight in the criminal justice system, and to, protect yourself and your loved ones. And so we're out of time. I thank you all so much for joining us today. This is a discussion that we could continue for hours, because we have a lot of war stories to tell, and a lot of work to do, really, in this area as well, in making sure that we live up to the Constitution that we all live under. And so we want to thank you all for joining us today. And I'm going to give our panelists the ability to give us some closing words. And also please provide your information so that you can be contacted and the people can know how to reach you in their time of need. Because when I tell you that you're looking at some powerful litigators, some defense attorneys, some people who know how to get the job done, then believe me, you want to have their information and you want to be able to contact them if you need them or if you know someone who need them and could be, they can be of help to you or your loved ones in this hour. And so, Attorney Norris, can you provide us with some closing comments and please give out your information so the people can contact you?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I actually learned more than I'm sure I informed, but I enjoyed being part of the panel. The brothers on the panel are, of course, impressive, and I appreciate everything that they've shared. And I need to give you your flowers the way you've given your mentors theirs. You have always been very helpful to me, the way that you have described Sister Pam being helpful to you, and I appreciate everything you do and the way that you fight for families and kids. I can be reached at 713-226-7220 for any of your criminal defense needs. I just want to remind our community that Minnesota was where we watched Philando Castile be killed in front of his wife and baby, and they didn't even bring an indictment. So again, as Sister Qiana said, we're not lulled to sleep. What we saw was egregious. We see a little bit of change, but we have to save ourselves. It's just going to be upon us to save ourselves. However we do it, it has to be us taking control of ourselves, informing ourselves, and making sure that we conduct ourselves in a way that makes us thrive. So I appreciate you having me, and I appreciate the time for whoever watched.
Attorney Arif Muhammad.
Yes, ma'am. Assalamu alaikum once again, Sister Qiana, our resident superwoman, and all of the rest of the great panelists. What a great honor. I am in practice, but I'm not in private practice, but I practice on behalf of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam. However, I'm always available to give advice. I'm always honored when I'm called to give advice. I would say this: Frederick Douglass had a statement: power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, it never will. The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan has said to us from the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, see it as our unity that can bring an end to these atrocities in our communities, because we have to be willing to show that we are willing to make those who abuse us and mistreat us pay the consequence for these wicked deeds. And it is only when they feel the consequences of their actions. When you're dealing with a wicked beast, the only thing the beast understands is your power to harm him. This is why Russia and America have so-called détente, why Russia and China and America have détente with each other. Why? Because they all have the power to injure one another in a serious way. So that makes you to consider before you take an action. And so what I'm saying to us as Black people, our unity is more powerful than an atomic bomb, said the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And if we unify as a people and bring the power that we do have to bear, not just during a election cycle when we're seeking to put someone in the high office. We're watching the atrocity of our brothers and sisters in Palestine being murdered. And yet the man that we put in office is siding with the murderers. This is not good at all. And so what I'm saying to us, we have to come into unity, and starting in our communities with one another, putting the pressure. If our city councilmen and aldermen know that if you don't do that which protects us in the community, we have to get rid of you and get someone in there that is going to fight for us. The same at the mayor's level, the same at the governor's level, the same at the state legislatures level, the same at the congressional level, and the same at the Senate level, and even into the White House. So let us come into unity and love each other enough where we just do not think it's okay for us to be killed indiscriminately. I was watching the situation on TV and how they were talking about the great disparity between the deaths that are going over in Palestine. We are being killed like that here. And so let us love ourselves enough and come into unity with one another and fight to preserve our lives, because our life is valuable. Black lives definitely matter, especially to God. Thank you.
And I would conclude, audience, Sister Qiana, Brother Arif, Sister Pamela, Sister Mellissa, Brother Warren, and thanking you, Sister Qiana, over and over again for your insight to having these webinars. Like Sister Mellissa said, I've learned a lot. I always do, always learn, and always just so thankful, that I'm along for the ride, if you will. And unfortunately, Brother Warren wasn't able to continue on the ride, but I'm going to give him his props because he, again, is one of my mentors. And so if anyone, needs to reach or would like to reach Brother Warren, who is a pillar in this community and practicing law, as we said, for over 40 years, his number where he can be reached is 832-297-9721. And I can be reached on my direct line, 713-807-8167, or our general office number, which is 713-589-6404. And our illustrious, and I'm telling you, I couldn't do what I do without our assistant, Sister Patricia Muhammad, who talks me off ledges and all of these different things. And I just thank Allah for her. And I couldn't do what I'm doing, half of the things, without her administrative thought and her guidance and her, keeping me in line, talking to me and telling me how best I need to, talk to somebody who I represent. And in a close, this is one of the things, and I'm going to make it quick, Sister Qiana, I promise I will. But this is one of the things, and I want to go right back to what we were talking about, how we began the conversation and how Brother Arif talked about it's the mindset. It's the mindset of white superiority, white, racism. And it stems from, in my opinion, as far as from the legal side, this famous quote that I pray to a lot that I never, ever forget, done by Justice Taney in the Dred Scott case. He wrote, "They," meaning blacks, "had for more than a century before been regarded as beings of an inferior order and altogether unfit to associate with the white race, either in social or political relations, and so far inferior that they had no rights which the white man was bound to respect, and that the Negro might justly and lawfully be reduced to slavery for his benefit." I say that, yes, that was in 1865, and that case has been overturned. But as Brother Arif was saying, the mindset is still there. And I know we talked about filing complaints and all of these different things, and I'm not trying to paint a pessimistic picture at all. But as we know, some of us who were fortunate to meet with the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, he told a group of us, our job is to make the record. And in making the record, the way that I understood it, our job is to make the argument, make the record, so that when the day of judgment comes, which it is, Allah will pass sentence. So fear not, brothers and sisters, fear not those of us who are listening, we will be the victors. Thank you so much, listening audience. And I pray to Allah that I didn't say anything that was wrong. And if I did, please forgive me. We just pray and thank Allah for me being able to say one or two words that if indeed one or two people are able to escape a police encounter, then perhaps what I said then we can actually say, okay, well, all praises are due to Allah for me being able to at least give some insight for your protection. Thank you, family.
Thank you. And I want to provide our sister panelist, Sister Attorney Pamela Muhammad's information. She was so informative and gracious with her time to be able to share with us today. And she has a baby who is graduating. And so I really appreciate her for taking time to be with us on today. She has an office in Stafford. Her number is 281-208-3888. And her email is pamlegal2000@gmail.com. And she can be also accessed on the Coalition Facebook page, and that is the Coalition for the Preservation of the Black Family. And so again, thank you so much to all of our panelists who joined us today on the topic of living under the shadow of death. But as it also says in that Psalm 23, I should fear no evil because thou art with me. And he does. As you can see, he prepares a table before us in the presence of our enemies with the people that we have in our community. So I thank you so much, listeners, for joining us today. And we hope to bring you more experts, more professionals that you can learn from and that you can work with in our community. And we will see you next time. I pray that you enjoyed it. Goodbye.